So it's my pleasure to hand over to Daisy Douglas, who's chairing this session.
Thank you very much. Oh, lovely. That's brilliant. I don't have to do anything. I got a round of applause. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know about you, but I feel like every day should start with live music and poetry. I'm like, that's so much better than an alarm clock. That was like glorious and amazing. So hello, thank you so much for joining us today. As Gemma said, my name is Daisy Douglas. I'm going to be the chair for today's discussion. We're going to be with you till about 12:40, 12:45. We'll spend the first part of the morning and the discussion talking about some of the hows, and not some of the hows, some of the whats even, some of the whats. What are we coming up against? What are the challenges? What are we seeing across education at the moment, especially in terms of RSE or relationships and sex education? And then we will spend the latter part talking about some of those hows. What are we doing? What can we do? What can those calls to action be? If that feels all right for everyone? Does that feel all right? No. You can say no if you want. That's also okay. So as I said, I'm Daisy Douglas. I am the programme manager for Tender. Tender is a charity that uses drama and the arts to engage young people from 8 up to 25 around domestic abuse and sexual violence prevention education. And we very much do this by promoting positive and healthy relationships. Alongside direct work with children and young people, we also work with adults, we work with staff, and we also are beginning to work a little bit more with parents as well. So I'm the programme manager specifically for the South West. So I've been involved with the organisation for over 15 years as a facilitator. I deliver a lot of the work. I have the joy of being in the classroom with children and young people delivering this work. But I also hold all of our output and delivery in the South West. We are a national charity. And we'll talk a little bit more about Tender specifically later on. So that's who I am. I've got some wonderful people over here. We'll see there was an empty chair. We unfortunately aren't joined by Gemma Ellis, who is a local educational psychologist. She's very poorly and didn't want to cough and splutter over everyone. But she's here in spirit. But these lovely people are. So if I could just ask each of them just to say hello and introduce themselves and tell you a little about who they are and what's their connection today. So Jake, if we could start with you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Jake Saunders. I'm the head of school and youth setting programmes at Tender. So as well as supporting the fantastic work that Daisy does here in this region, I also have the joy of seeing Tender's work in action across the country. So we have hubs up in West Yorkshire, we have a hub in and out of Norwich in Norfolk, and historically the majority of our work has happened unsurprisingly in London, who seem to get all of the work. But we're very excited to be growing and expanding the work across the UK. I had a really exciting journey with Tender. I joined Tender 10 years ago as a youth board member, so as a young activist wanting to get involved in spreading the word of Tender. Then I joined as a freelance facilitator, so delivering the work in schools and youth settings, working directly with young people and seeing the impact, and then moved into the office where now I get to sort of take a bit more of a back seat and just see the impact that Tender is having across the country. Which is
not a backseat. You do work really hard. Let's not just just sitting around twiddling your thumbs in the office.
There is some of that.
A bit of that. We all need a bit of that. We all need some downtime. Thank you, Jake. Sarah.
Hello, everybody. My name's Sarah McNaughton. I am a teacher in a secondary school in Bath and have the absolute pleasure of working with Daisy on the Tender project. So she comes in and facilitates projects with us, with our Year 9 students specifically. That happened, I took over, I'm head of PSHE at my school, so I took on that role in 2019, and before that there was somebody that had held the project as well the year before me, so I took it on and we've run with it. We've also been lucky enough to be part of a reset project, which is working with Tender on a longer project over a year to really look at our RSHE curriculum. And yeah, it's been an eye-opener, and it's been a really, really valuable experience for the students mainly, and then for us as teachers. So I'm here to talk about the wonderful experiences of Tender and how they can help our students.
Thank you. And last but not least, Leanne.
Hi, my name's Leanne Price. My story's going to be a lot shorter, so I've only been with Tender about a month. So I've been in one meeting, and this is my first panel ever, so I'm very excited.
But you're also sitting in, Jake started on the youth board, so soon you'll be leading the organisation. So it's all brilliant. Thank you. It's wonderful to have you here. So that's us, that's who we are, and you're going to obviously hear from us quite a lot over this next little bit. I would like to find out a little bit more about the room. Now, I'm really aware that suddenly that might make us go, oh my God, audience participation, what is this, what might this be? First thing to say is you don't have to do this if you don't want to. The second thing to say is I'm just going to ask a series of questions. If you agree with the question, if the question is true of you, I'd just like you to raise your hand. I'm not going to ask anyone to talk about their responses, but don't feel you have to do it. It's just so we can explore some of the similarities between us in a room and some of the differences and be proud of those differences. So we're going to start with something very, very simple. Put your hand up, anyone who travelled by bus or train today? Look, already we've got things in common. Very, very good. Anyone who has bought a fancy or expensive coffee or hot beverage this morning? I always think that's a treat, and then I'm like, that much money, was that a treat? Okay, anyone who felt nervous or anxious about coming today? Yeah. Anyone who has spoken to someone that they hadn't ever spoken to before already today? And just with that one, let's just give ourselves a little pat on the back. Because it's like, yeah, that's really good. I'm out of the house, I've had a fancy coffee, I've spoken to someone new. Now, specifically, as we said, we're going to be talking about relationship and sex education, so RSE. And obviously, Tender's standpoint is very much the relationship education. Sex obviously does come into those conversations sometimes, but predominantly we talk about relationships and the myriad of things that can connect to relationships. But we are going to be talking about RSE, so relationships and sex education. So if I can ask you just to think back to your time in education, whatever that may have looked like. For some of us, that might be a long look back. For some of us, that might be relatively short, or it may even be current. So I'd ask you to put your hand up if anyone who remembers having any type of relationship, education, or discussions at school. Okay, there was more for fancy coffee. Okay, that's interesting. Anyone who learnt about early warning signs that relationships might not be okay in those relationship sessions? Couple of hands, not many. Okay. Anyone who learnt about consent in those sessions? I saw a brilliant sort of, oh, actually, I don't know if it was. I think, I'm not sure. Okay, interesting. Anyone who was ever given a space at school to discuss their feelings about relationships?
I just say none.
Okay. None. A little bit. Okay, so the hands are getting less, which is really interesting. Finally, anyone who felt discussions around relationship education were good at school? And I'm really glad there's someone with their hand up who is a younger person, which means hopefully we're getting better, which is really positive. So that's really useful for us to just sort of get a feeling of what all of our experiences have been, and also looking at what our hopes might be for that relationship education discussion moving forward. So thank you for participating in that. So relationship education, PSHE, personal social health education, is a wide topic. There's lots to talk about. As I say, we're going to start by talking a little bit about what are some of those what are we coming up against. So if I could start by asking the lovely panel, in terms of your engagement with children and young people, families, staff, what are we seeing or what are you noticing that are the issues that our children and young people are coming up against? Like what's in their horizon of the things that they're concerned about or wanting to talk about? Who would like to start? Yeah, go Leanne. Yes, Leanne's starting.
Am I raising my hand to
No, you
take
don't
it?
have to raise
Okay.
your hand.
I think social media is a massive new landscape for students, and the way relationships work now, you're expected to have almost an online relationship, even if you've met maybe a partner in school. You're kind of expected to be constantly texting them, or you can have long-distance online relationships now, and there aren't any really safety talks on how to verify identity or what those relationships look like, what those expectations are. There isn't any education in place for that, really.
Okay. So there's a sort of it's interesting, you used the same word twice. You said expectation. And I think that's a really prevalent word for lots of us, but especially for young people. There's a sort of expectation you just know how to do it. I think that about social media all the time. I'm like, I should know how to do this, but why? Why should I know? And I think young people are feeling that absolutely in the landscape that you said around relationships specifically. Jake or Sarah, what do you think, or what are you noticing?
I think at the moment, more so than it has been for quite a long time, the conversation around gender is very, very prevalent again. And particularly there not being the space to talk about gender, be that your experience of masculinity or your experience of the world as it relates to the opposite gender or the same gender, and particularly around relationships. So without that space, where are young people turning to? And without fail, we're hearing influencers, we're hearing peers, we're hearing pornography, we're hearing, online platforms, other spaces that particularly boys and young men are going into to find out who they are and who they think their gender is, and perhaps not necessarily finding those answers in a really healthy or open space.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah, what for you in terms of, so you're with children and young people all
In
the
it.
time. You're
Yeah,
right in the middle
right
of it.
in the middle of it, yeah.
Are you hearing similar things, different
yeah,
things?
I think social media is having a huge impact on our young people. I think it has a huge impact on us as adults, and we can't always navigate, how often do we respond to people on email, or, when is the time to kind of switch off and say, I don't need to keep communicating with somebody. Also messages, we get lots of students who, they will come and say, how do I respond to this message? So I think when you're actually having a conversation face to face with somebody, it's so much easier there's that expression, there's that tone in language, whereas our young people don't have that because they play on computers, they are texting, they are Snapchatting, and it's emojis, and it's all these different, filters and things like that. So I think they are kind of losing themselves through that because they don't know how to communicate nicely with each other, or they interpret things differently. So it might be, I suppose as adults as well, we do that, don't we? You might send a message thinking, oh, this sounds really light and breezy, and then your friend comes back and go, what do you mean by that? And you're like, and then you ring them and you go, I meant it like, and they go, oh. So I think, social media is not a good...
So it's also interesting that you said that you're finding young people are coming to you and saying, how should I respond to this? So it comes back to expectation, which is what we started with, isn't it? An expectation of how to navigate the landscape, an expectation about how to engage with that landscape, and also an expectation about, well, who am I in this landscape in terms of my identity and all of those things.
And that's I find that with friendships, not me personally, but through students, that's friendships, but then that's also navigating relationships as well, and how they communicate with each other differently. And we do talk about that within our curriculum, and I know every school is different and I can't talk for every school, but in year 7 we are talking about kind of how you talk to each other nicely. And at the moment one of our themes is kindness and respect to each other, so I had an assembly last week talking about that, but in relation to LGBT plus History Month, which is happening at the moment, and how we all just have to be ourselves, and you can be kind, and you don't have to be an ally and not be somebody that's going, that's wrong, that's being open.
I was going to say there's also the expectation that the adults have the answers. The fact that there's a young person coming to you asking you how to respond. We've just seen that majority of us didn't receive that space in our own experience of education to talk about these things. So although we're viewed as the experts, actually as educators, as adults navigating the world with young people looking at us as role models perhaps, are we equipped to have those conversations and to give them the response that they need and that they want? And hearing particularly from teachers and educators a lot about how at the moment there's not necessarily the support to enable them to have those conversations really confidently. How do you give the right answer? How do I respond to this message about from my boyfriend? Well, I don't know. That's your boyfriend. You should know how to respond to that.
And I think there's something very interesting about that we are sort of often seen to should have the answers as grown-ups, and yet we're all I always describe myself as I'm just a slightly bigger child. I've just grown up a little bit in terms of my body shape, not necessarily anything else. And I think actually events like this where we actually get a chance to come together and have these discussions and have this time to sit and reflect, not just a series of insect days at school, or as my daughter calls them, insect days, which I think sounds much more fun.
Much more
She asked me
interesting.
if I was going to an insect day today. I said, I don't know, now there's dogs, so maybe, it's quite good. And so we're hearing a lot of these things that are coming up for children and young people, but also the challenges for the adults supporting them. So those are potentially what we're trying to prevent. And what happens if we don't? If we just ignore all of those things, if we don't, as spaces of education, give space and time to understanding the online world, understanding the expectations or the limits sometimes that people put on us about our identities, or if we don't explore what gender might look like, feel like, be for young people, what happens then? What happens if we just don't do any of this? What are your thoughts about that? If we just didn't do PSHE and RSE, what would happen? Sarah, what do you think?
Things.
Bad things would happen.
The PSHE, so that's personal, social and health education, I would say the curriculum has had to change. And I know you've spoken about kind of teachers having training, but we are in secondary, we are trained in specific subjects. We have life experience, but the children do not want to know what Mr. So-and-so did when he was 16 and his experiences. They want advice now. So a lot of it is that we would give advice from or send students to other support networks. So we've got a very large pastoral team who have more specialised training. So if there wasn't PSHE at all, I suppose the resources, that's what it would come down to, that we would be, lots of students might be talking to us and reporting things to teachers that they trust and that they want to share information with, but then it would be us kind of passing it on, so they wouldn't be gaining those skills in lessons to kind of equip themselves already, I suppose. Yeah.
I think it's good to remember that social media is so new that even courts and regulators are scrambling to try and keep the regulation up on what data protection should be there, what child protection should be there. I think Facebook's been in and out of court for that very thing. So if we're struggling, even in the legal system, to regulate social media, it's going to be very difficult to make a curriculum based around what safe social media looks like.
There's so much misinformation, isn't there? So that is one thing that they come to us and they, is this right? Is this right? And we do, at my school, we try to teach them about kind of reading the signs and taking on board information, and they have to make a decision on whether it's right or not.
It's an ever-changing landscape, isn't it, in terms of the curriculum around PSHE or RSE. It's ever-changing, and with no disrespect to maths teachers, maths doesn't really shift. God forsake that I should say such a thing. I didn't pass maths GCSE. You can probably tell. But we know often curriculum can get repeated year on year. I have this lesson plan and I can redo it, and of course there may be a shift of how I talk about equations. But actually the landscape for what we cover in PSHE is changing all the time, and young people are vastly aware of that. They know that, and they're coming into those spaces knowing that something happened just yesterday that impacts what they need to talk about today. That's different from maths, for example. So I think, absolutely, how do we keep up to speed with that, make sure that there's training and support for those delivering it, making sure those delivering it are the right people to deliver it for those children and young people. So I'm sure everyone in this room is aware that relationship and sex education became a mandatory requirement in schools in 2020. That curriculum hadn't been updated or revised for 20 years, so since 2000. And if we're saying things can shift from one day to the next, in 20 years, that's a very, very different landscape. Obviously, lots of schools within that 20 years have been delivering relationship education, but it's not been a mandatory requirement. So in terms of the changes, so now there is an expectation, and I'll just read it here. It was specifically brought around, this change, because of increasing concerns around child sexual abuse and exploitation and the risks associated with growing up in a digital world. What are people's feelings about these shifts and changes? If I could come to you first, Sarah, as someone who is delivering that, and I know that your school was delivering elements of it anyway.
Yeah.
What have the changes helped? Have the changes changed it for you as teachers and as a school?
There are certain things, as a teacher, we kind of thought, oh, we can't go into a school and talk about pornography. Ooh. And it was things like that as teachers. So I have a team of teachers who teach PSHE for me. Some of them, I would say, are more confident in teaching certain areas of the curriculum. Certainly when these statutory requirements came in, we were already covering a lot of that material anyway. We were just people that were doing it. And I know other schools did struggle because there are lots of topics on there which people hadn't spoken about before.
Which sort of topics were coming up as things that were new?
Well, FGM, I think, is spoken. We do have to talk about FGM and abortion, pornography. There's lots of different things on there. So I actually had to make a video for my teachers because some of them were like, I don't want to say pornography, I don't want to talk about it. So I went, right, that's fine, I'm going to make a video, but not a video, just to put that out there. Look, it's okay, it's Mrs. McNaughton doing. Honestly, you've got to choose your wording very carefully when you start discussing these subjects. So I made a little film just to say I'm going to be the teacher that talks about this first, so the other teachers could just press play on their PowerPoint that I provided and go, watch this, and they could stand at the side. And I was like, make sure you're stood on the right so I can go, your teacher's not going to be the first one to say this, but I will, pornography. And then, my students wanted, that's just year 9 and year 10 as well. And that's the other thing, we've got to start introducing things a lot younger. You kind of think, oh, I can't talk about these things in front of this group of kids who are there going, hello. And they all seem quite new and sparkly. And then you're having to talk to them about all this information. So it's definitely having the right team, the right training. It's about having the right people in front of a class who are happy to take on questions as well.
And
so
can I
that's
ask
really important.
Can I ask on that in terms of having the right team? Because I've worked in
Yeah.
lots of schools where I've been told, well, these are the teachers that have got gap
Freeze.
in their curriculum.
Yeah.
They've got gap in their timetable so they
Yeah.
can deliver it. We wouldn't expect that of teachers to teach science. We wouldn't
No.
just say, oh, well, they're not trained in it, but they can deliver
No.
it. So why does that still get allowed around PSHE and RSE, do you think?
Well,
Do you have an answer? Come on, answer this.
not
before-
really, but
Yeah.
the one thing I will say, for year 9 and year 10, I will sit down with the person that plans the timetable and we'll go through it, and he'll say, these are the teachers that you can have. And I'm like, right, definite no. And he's like, I agree. And so that sounds terrible, doesn't it? I'll disappear. I work in a school in Australia. It's like, so you just know who will be able to deliver the content in a sensitive way and a knowledgeable way, and then we make sure that we have training sessions, and certainly through working with Daisy, that has become better. But it's definitely, sometimes teachers leave and then they go, right, these two, and I'm like, oh.
Because it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think, of course,
Yeah.
first and foremost, we have a duty of care to the children and young
Yeah.
people that we serve.
Yeah.
But also, as an educational setting, you also need to support your staff to deliver
Yes.
things that can be really difficult. And I've had many conversations with children and young people who've said, I don't want my teachers to deliver this work. I
Yeah.
feel awkward. I feel embarrassed. I want
Yeah.
you to come in because I don't have to see you tomorrow at registration or
That is
in
the
my,
other thing. They're like, do we really have to? And I'm like, yes, we are going to be talking about this today. And they're like, fine. But it's that very much how you deliver it. If any students don't want to take part, so we still have that in place as well, that some parents, I have to send letters out to parents and carers to say, are you happy for your child to have this education? The requirement is that parents and carers can remove their children from that part of PSHE if they don't want them to learn about
they have
it.
to get head teacher has to allow
The
that,
head
doesn't
teacher
it?
has to allow it, but up until, I think it's 3 months before their 16th birthday, and then a student can say, no, actually, I do want all this information. I do want to know about it.
Yeah.
And then we would kind of go for it.
Because I think as well, I've been, it's in my consciousness all the time, but sitting this morning watching what people potentially are carrying around before they come into the doors of school is so important to remind ourselves. And that's not just the children and young people, but also the adults that are delivering this material. I think it's so important to be mindful of that everyone should have the ability to say something doesn't feel okay or feels
Yeah.
awkward for them. Absolutely, young people should,
Yeah.
and we champion young people as an organisation ourselves. But also, we need to support the adults serving those young people to say, I don't feel comfortable, and not have to justify why they might not
Yeah,
feel
no,
comfortable
yeah.
to deliver that material, because it can be provocative. And those sessions, relationship education sessions, can be provocative spaces, and that's really positive. I love it when it feels alive and children and young people want to ask tricky questions, because it might be the only space they have. Jake, anything you want to add about changes in the curriculum? Anything that you've noticed?
I think it's fantastic, of course, that this is a compulsory aspect of education now. And I think that it's absolutely a step in the right direction. However, unless schools, unless teachers are given the resources to be able to do that safely and supportively, there's still a lot more work to be done. So to be given a list of topics to cover is not enough. How do you have a conversation about FGM if you have to Google what FGM stands for, and you have to go on find your own training course that might well be of additional expense to the school to educate yourself on that, and then go in front of a group of potentially teenagers or young people and talk about it confidently. I think there's still a lot of work to do in order to be confident that we are supporting our young people with a statutory duty.
And it is very different across different schools as well. Even though there is this statutory requirement, everybody is teaching it very differently, I would say.
And if the information is not provided, and it's the same for young people, if the spaces aren't provided for you, you have to find that out yourself. And that often leads you into unreliable spaces.
Yeah.
That leads you to, hearing, conversations about transgender young people in the news. It's heard in the news all the time, so that becomes your source of information, and that's by no stretch enough information to enable you to have a supportive conversation with a young person who's questioning their gender identity in the classroom. And that's the same across the board, this long list of topics. What support are we providing educators?
Yeah. Okay, and I suppose there's two things I'm going to say. One is, we've mentioned FGM a couple of times. I'm sure most people know what that is, but if you're thinking, I need to Google that, we've just said maybe we shouldn't be Googling everything. So that's female genital mutilation, just if people want to know what that abbreviation means. In terms of, so it's now a mandatory requirement, there's changes, there's new, it comes back to the word expectation. Have you been provided, as someone who is leading PSHE in a school, what are the changes to what is provided to you so that you're not having just to make it from scratch?
Yeah. I was able to go, I have done a qualification at university on the PSHE, but just as a whole.
But is that something that your school supported you to do?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was. But did you
Yeah,
have to
there was-
find out about that? Were you told that existed?
I don't know how I knew it existed, and I said, can I go forward? And they were like, yes, of course you can do that. That is very good.
Okay.
So yeah, so I went to university and did that for a year. That was a course for a year. They do allow me to go on training. We also have a nurse that comes in. That's the other thing. We do have, so we've got a school nurse who is amazing and deals with the day-to-day, I don't feel very well, and injuries and things like that. But we do have a nursing service that come in and provide advice and counselling services as well. So those nurses, I liaise with them, and they come in to teach specific parts of the curriculum. So contraception, STIs, and also like domestic violence as well. So we are very lucky that we've got resources, and we've got a really good pastoral team who are very well trained. So as well as the PSHE staff or team, there are more opportunities for me to go and do things.
And have you been given additional sort of planning, preparation and assessment
Yes,
time?
yeah, I get additional planning time, and there are really good resources out there. There is a PSHE association, so I think many schools join that, and then there are schemes of work that are written in, and then I will adapt them for our school. Because that's the other thing. I think all schools have very different requirements. So we have a designated safeguarding lead, and I talk with her weekly about issues. She doesn't talk about specific students, but she does say, you know, in year 10, I'd like you to go off and research and have a look at this topic, because we have, you know, a situation in the school. This needs to be looked at, but we're trying to not make it reactionary. But these things are already in place. But then every so often there's year 9, could we just do a recap on consent? Could we just do a recap on so-and-so? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And then I will change things.
Do you find
around.
that you're having to, as head of PSHE, you're having to engage with teachers cross-curriculum to talk about what's coming up for children and young people
Yeah.
more in your role as PSHE lead
Yeah.
than, say, as a dance teacher,
Yes.
which is your other role?
Yes.
Because I'm aware that it suddenly sounds like, actually, it's not, I'm on my one sort of running track of I
Yeah.
teach this subject, but actually
Yeah.
it wiggles all round the
It
school,
does
doesn't
wiggle
it?
all
when we're
around the
thinking about
school.
it?
So yeah, so if there's a particular issue that's brought up by the designated safeguarding lead, I will say, I'll go and talk to it sounds a bit under, but the RSE teacher, so religious, what is it, religion? I think social ethics person, and just say, have you covered this? What year do you cover this in? And check that that's there. Science, I'm always over in science going, when do you talk about this? Have you talked about this? What year have you done this in? And then, so yeah, I'm a bit of a liaiser.
So that, I mean, that's brilliant that you're able to do that, but that also
Yeah.
does sound like a lot on your shoulders as the head of PSHE, and I'm aware that obviously that role can fall to lots of different people in lots of different schools.
Yeah.
You're also holding another role.
Yeah.
Is that, in all honesty, do you feel that you have enough time to really be able to
Some
do
weeks,
all that's
yes.
expected?
Some weeks, no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And if you're off, if you're not in school, if you're unwell, is there a
yes.
team that wraps around PSHE?
Gives me a cuddle.
Gives you a nice gentle
Yeah,
hug
so
with your
I've got
permission?
a line manager who then I go, don't forget to do this. But as teachers, we have to set cover. So if I was off for PSHE, I would not be making them, the cover teachers who we have at school go in and teach anything really huge, because they're just kind of going into cover. So I would set additional lessons on worldwide issues,
Yeah.
generally, not specific RSHE or
Okay.
anything that needs to be taught.
Jake?
What's really interesting
Carefully.
is seeing the work that Tender does naturally in the schools that we work with across all of our areas, is how different it is an experience for the young people when there is a teacher like Sarah, or a teacher who is specifically invested in the issue,
Yeah.
or an issue. And we know that, of course, that interest comes from somewhere. A lot of the teachers that we're working with have lived experience of child sexual abuse, of domestic abuse, and are then having to pick up the mantle and fly that flag in their schools as well. And I just think we can't keep on relying on the energy of those who are already giving so much. Yeah, there needs to be more done to make sure that there are appointed people in schools who, not just an appointed person, a trained person whose entire job it is to make sure that PSHE is coordinated well throughout the school.
It would be amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, my hope is that it becomes a subject in its own right,
Yeah.
that people get trained to deliver like you would science or maths or any of the other subjects, because it's a skill, and young people recognise that. They really recognise the breadth of it, and they want to know more about it. So I just want to think about another challenge that came up for all of us, which was COVID. And I wonder, in all of your experience, did you notice a change in young people's engagement with the issues that are being spoken about or covered or experienced in sort of PSHE or RSE? And in terms of disclosures, did that shift or change? So that was a two-part question. Young people's interactions with the issues that get covered in relationship education or PSHE, and did you notice a spike in disclosures or cause for concerns around any of those issues? Jake, could we start with you as a sort of broader awareness of Tender's work up and down the country around that?
Absolutely. So Tender, first and foremost, is a prevention organisation. We go in and we talk about relationships, with an understanding that quite a lot of the young people that we've worked with and work with haven't yet ventured into that part of life yet. However, we understand and appreciate that in every single classroom that we're in, there will be young people that this is a very, very present conversation for. So we make sure to emphasise our role in a school, that we are a prevention organisation first. We have a massive and fantastic list of signpost organisations that we will refer young people to. But even so, young people in our sessions don't necessarily look at us as, you know, the people that are going to solve the issues that they're having. That said, we have still seen a humongous increase in disclosures, particularly since COVID. Of all kinds, whether or not that's historic disclosures or whether or not it's very live situations, and the nature actually of the work that we do, and the arts-based approach that we take, which it keeps a lot of the issues and the subject at arm's length. We look at things through character, we look at things through various different activities. Young people often disclose without realising that they are disclosing. They, for example, the exercise that Daisy ran at the beginning, where she asks anybody who, we play a version of that in our classrooms that's much more sort of practical and up and about, and people move around. And that, just as a simple icebreaker game, actually provides an opportunity for a young person to potentially put their hand up and say, anybody who feels depressed sometimes, that in itself could be a massive revelation in that space for that young person. And again, since COVID, we've seen young people using all of our activities as opportunities to talk about themselves and the experiences that they're going through. So that was a really long way of answering your question, and the answer is yes.
No, absolutely. I can see the words going up behind your head as you're talking.
no.
No, it's wonderful.
Is that automatic, or is somebody having to type that up?
I don't know, it's magic.
Sorry if
Is
it
that
is real.
automatic or, yeah, it is.
Sarah, what for you?
Forgot
have
the
you
question.
noticed
I
in
forgot the
terms
question.
of
Sorry, Jane.
what children and young people are, since sort of COVID, are there spikes or trends or things that are louder for children and young people they're bringing into the classroom? That's sort of one part of the question. The other part is around disclosures or causes for concern. Have you noticed a rise in those since children and young people coming back into school?
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a system called CPOMS in school. So if teachers are, you know, if children, students talk to us about specific things that we feel may mean that they are at harm or at risk, then we can pass that information on to our designated safeguarding lead. And yeah, obviously we hold that information, but we were discussing this at a staff meeting and just saying that CPOMS entries by teachers who are kind of picking up on things that children have said or that they've spoken to certain teachers, they have increased a lot, which I think is a good thing, because the students are coming forward and saying things, and it might be that a really simple little comment from a student and you think, oh, that doesn't sound quite right, and you might bring it up, but actually it's part of a bigger puzzle. So if we log it on our CPOM system, then it gets brought up to the kind of right people, and then they can get the right help. I think our lovely DSL always says it's amazing how you can just meet a child in a corridor and be like, oh, hello, I wasn't expecting to bump into you today, and then have a conversation and just check that they're okay. Lots of checking that students are okay, and sometimes it is just something that they've said, and it's sometimes it is a bigger picture.
It's sometimes just that right question, isn't it, which we heard from our advocate from the Flying Circus, that actually, oh, no one had ever asked me that before. No one had ever actually looked at me and asked, how are you, or how is this, or, you know, those open questions are, we talk about them all the time, but they're so vital in unpicking what might be going on for someone. And when Tender started 20 years ago, when we would approach schools frequently, schools would say, oh, we don't want, you know, we heard it a lot, we don't want to open a can of worms. It's like young people are talking about this, young people are exploring this. If we don't provide spaces for children and young people, they will go and find it somewhere else. And as Jake said, often that is going to be a place that might not be a healthy space to hold that information or offer that education. So we're sort of getting that less. I come up against that a lot less when I'm talking to schools and settings now, but it still does come up. In terms of relationship education, so there was a survey conducted just before this mandatory requirement came in. It was a survey of about 2,000 teachers conducted by NSPCC and the National Education Union. And the survey found that from the 2,000 staff that were surveyed, 28% believed their school was not ready to deliver the new RSE curriculum, and 47% of staff lacked confidence in their own ability to teach it. And I think, it's really important, as we said, that we go back to making sure that we're equipping those adults and young people, those adults to support our young people, because it comes back to that, you should just sort of know how to do it. We're all still figuring it out, aren't we? No matter what our age is, we're still trying to figure out what relationships are, what are positive relationships from our own lived experience or the world around us. Yet there's a sort of expectation that, you're a teacher, you should just be able to teach this to other people. So in terms of staff, and this may be, Leanne, through your eyes in terms of your experience as a young person being taught, but also as us teaching, what do we think are the main concerns for staff delivering RSE? What do we notice, or what are the challenges that are being presented to staff? And also, maybe if we start with you, Leanne, anything you noticed either from yourselves or from friendships that has been said about how RSE is taught by the teachers? Like, what's going on for young people in terms of the teachers that are teaching it? Do they feel confident in those staff? No.
A lot of them are still quite uncomfortable talking about it, but it's so inconsistent.
Okay.
So one teacher, I remember learning about relationships in Welsh back booklets.
So you did a lot of your schooling in Wales, didn't
yeah,
you? Okay. So it's a slightly different curriculum.
Yeah, so I first learned about relationships in America, but that was where one person came in for one day and said, this is where you shouldn't be touched, and that was it. That was the only relationship education we had. And then in Canada, the only thing we had was abstinence, and that was delivered by our gym teacher.
Okay.
And then,
Basically, we brought Leanne in because she can talk about relationships education around the world, which is really helpful. So brilliant. So we've got don't do it and don't be touched there. So there's nothing about pleasure or consent or...
No, I've never been taught about
engagement.
consent. And in the UK, we were given booklets on, it was called relationships, but it was just STIs, and we had to do the research on what the STIs were.
Okay.
And we had to write about it in the booklet, and then hand the booklet into our teacher.
Research task,
Yeah.
lovely.
Okay.
And that was it.
So no space to discuss, talk about, certainly not talk about feelings or...
No, I just learned about what STIs you could get.
Okay.
And I didn't even know how you could get them. I didn't know that they were I didn't know they were just sexual as well. I thought
Okay.
you could just get them anyway.
them.
Yeah, so it was very scary.
Have this.
So relationship education sounds
Non-existent.
really inviting
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
positive
Yeah.
in your
It's very
experience. Okay.
fear-based, I think,
Okay.
and very much trying to get you scared of all the diseases you could get, but we're not going to teach you what they are. You could
Yeah.
get them anywhere.
Okay.
And no relationships or what positive relationships look like. There weren't any examples
Okay.
of what that could be.
If it makes you feel better, when I was at school, my sister gave me a top that said Immaculate Conception, and I was too scared to wear it because I thought I might get pregnant if I wore it. It was like, what's that all about? So that sort of around fear is really loud, isn't it,
Yeah.
for a lot of children and young people. But also I think fear around the staff that deliver it as well, for maybe for different reasons. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
So, yeah, fear of some staff just do not want to teach anything. I think they're worried that they have to talk about their own experiences. I do have meetings with them, and I say no, they don't want to hear about your experiences. So it is about. It sounds terrible, doesn't it, but keeping it factual. What we've got at the moment is a spiral curriculum. So you were saying, I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know how I was going to get an STI if I was going to. We start off with a spiral curriculum. So in year 7, they will look at the changes in the body and friendships and emotions, puberty, which they all go, we've already done this in year 6, miss. And I say, we're doing it again. Look at this video, do this task. They talk about it. They're like, are you doing it? Are you doing it? So they talk about it together just to start getting them to talk about it. And then in year 8, we talk about friendships more and how friendships might change. And we talk about that emotional connection and how those change. So yeah, and just looking at the healthy, we talk a lot about healthy relationships. They play healthy and unhealthy bingo in terms of relationships, and they go, I've got a healthy line, I've got an unhealthy line, so they know about that. Year 9 we have this is all, there's other stuff around this, but this is just a snapshot. Then in Year 9 we've got a timeline, so we give, basically they do a whole lesson on this where there's like 26 options, and it's like, when do you think you might have your first kiss? When might you hit puberty? When might you do this? When might you cuddle? When might you get an STI? And they're like this, like writing it all down. They go, 40 for an STI? 40? And I'm going, don't know, but the nurse is coming in next week to talk to you about that. So it's quite interesting. And they've all got such different experiences. That's the other thing. So you are teaching classes where there are students, Year 10 still get RSHE as well, but that's the pornography, FGM, fertility, abortion. So it's awful that the Year 10 are just like bombarded. And there's a lot, we've had conversations about this in our Reset project. You kind of go, I don't want to move that down the curriculum, but then the DSL is going, this needs to go in the curriculum here now, and you're like, oh no, they're just tiny little Year 8s, they don't need to know about contraception. So yeah, as a teacher, that's quite a responsibility to make sure that it's all going in the right place, and it's equipping them, not making sure that they have the knowledge. So they're like, are we using them? No, you're not using them now, but it's just so that you know, and the options. There's lots of students get quite worried about the pill and kind of talking about that, but then we talk to them about that the pill isn't just for stopping having babies, and that lots of students take the pill for lots of different reasons. So it's kind of getting rid of the misinformation.
Because I was working with a school on our sort of year-long piece of work a couple of years ago, and we looked at all the subjects they were learning about in PSHE, and I asked the students in different focus groups, do you think that was delivered at the right time, or would you have liked it at a different time? And nearly all the subjects, they said, I wish I'd known that earlier. When Tender started, we only delivered work in secondary schools. We then heard from the children and young people we were serving, I wish I'd known that earlier. So we as an organisation said, okay, so now we have a primary programme that looks at safe and healthy friendships. And as you said, they might say, I learned about that in Year 6. It's all about stepping it up at the right time, isn't it? So and I'm very lucky now delivering the work across the South West. I'm starting to meet children and young people that I've taught in primary schools, now at secondary school, and being able to step up those conversations. And there's something really wonderful about rather than going, you wait till you get to Year 10 and you get this onslaught of big dramatic stuff. Actually, it's like, how do we do it incrementally? Because it's full on for all of us, isn't it? And I think there is something, really important about meeting children and young people where they are, but obviously making sure that we're aware that in a class of 30, you're going to have a range of different engagements, people who sit in a room as victim survivors, domestic abuse, sexual violence, victims, survivors of a myriad of different things, different lived experience, but also children and young people that may have perpetrated unhealthy behaviours within their own relationships. And obviously, as young people, we still have a duty of care to offer education to all. It's about saying, how do we give you a space to rewrite what may have gone before? This doesn't have to be your experience going forward. And I think
that's the other thing with COVID as well, that because there are students that have missed such large amounts of school, that it's then we still are kind of playing catch up with, hang on, were they in school for that, and making sure that the statutory parts of the curriculum are going in, because PSHE isn't just about relationship, sex and health education. There's also so much more. There's wider world issues, there's healthy lifestyles and things like that. So it's a really broad part of the curriculum, but is also very underrated. And talking about timetabling as well, when you're like, they're free, go, they can teach it, which is not good.
The main thing that I've certainly hearing from children and young people is they want more of it. Generally, they're saying, I want more of this. There was a young person actually at the school that Sarah works in who, in a focus group, said to me, the thing is, the stuff we learn in PSHE isn't like the square root of something. It's real life issues. It's like, you're in Year 7. You're saying that, absolutely. it's stuff that is prevalent for you, for all of us, all of the time. So they're wanting more of it, not less. Children and young people are saying to us, and again, we sit as Tender in a very lovely place that we are sort of separate from the schools. They'll say, I want more, but I don't just want a video about it. I want more, but I don't want just a video and no discussion. There has to be informed discussions, creative engagement around these issues. Otherwise, it's not connecting to me. And there is also, in terms of the sort of fear and apprehension for some staff, again, that thing of we should be taking it away from individual responses, I believe, and Tender very much believe that it's about equipping a whole school staff to feel confident in what the standpoint of the school is. We do it for our workshop leaders. Our workshop leaders need to go in to deliver any sessions and know what Tender's standpoint is, because children and young people will push us sometimes, but what do you think? And it's not about not being honest and human with our responses, but also it's not helpful for me to talk about my own responses to something. It's much safer for me as the adult delivering it, or the teacher delivering it, but also for those children and young people, they're hearing a collective thought about response. It also protects teachers from getting themselves in a tangle of responses. So I think the more we can come back together as collected responses as the people delivering this, the better.
I think it's from what we've been talking about so far, it's been quite top down in the delivery. And actually, I think that one of the most important things is actually allowing for peer learning, and actually this being a conversation that young people can have amongst themselves, and being able to facilitate that, which it's a skill. It's not something that any old maths teacher, sorry to use the maths teachers
There's brilliant
again,
maths teachers out there.
do.
There are.
And there are maths teachers that can do it. I will also say that. But being able to facilitate a safe space for young people to challenge each other, to be able to perhaps share a little bit of themselves without sharing everything, and doing so in a really safe way. That's where the power is.
Yeah.
When we see young people, when we see a group of young girls challenging the boys in the class about the statistics when it comes to the gendered nature of domestic abuse and sexual violence, for example, that's where the electricity lies, and that's where you see those boys clock, oh, actually, I'm sharing this harmful opinion that I've learned from Andrew Tate or someone online. Sorry to drop that name here.
I feel like I should do the swearing thing now, just bastard.
But seeing their mates, their boyfriends, or seeing the girls in that classroom unpick that's where the magic lies, and that's something that we can never do as the educators. We're not living in their social circles. So I think that is also the crucial thing that is missing from training, from the statutory requirements, from everything, is getting the teachers to a place where they can hold those spaces really safely.
And that brings us on beautifully, almost like we planned it, Jake, to talk specifically a little bit more about Tender. The first thing to say is we're not saying we're the only people doing this work well. I believe we're doing it well, but we're not the only people. But we are here to talk about our experience with the organisation. So I think what you say around the power of young people talking to young people are so used to adults talking at them. We try and talk towards them, with them, create a space that's about all of our voices. Because actually, if we're saying the curriculum hasn't been overhauled for 20 years, 20 odd years ago was when I did my education, when I was at school, it's vastly different. So I'm not the expert in their lives. As has been said already in the welcome ceremony, individuals are the experts in their own lives, and it's really important that we recognise that and we give them the power and space to discuss that. But also, as Jake said, it's a skill. It's about how do we safely create that space where people feel looked after without the pressure to share things if they don't want to, or know that if they do, it's going to be held respectfully, kindly, calmly. And I think the thing around conversations, we really encourage debate. Brilliant. I remember the first project I ran after COVID, again, was in Sarah's school, and it was like alive. Young people were desperate to talk to each other. They couldn't quite hear each other because they'd just been doing instant messenger. But there was this energy in the room, and there was a specific young man that talked about, well, if you're wearing certain underwear, then you definitely want to have sex. And I just thought, I don't have to say anything for a moment, because there was some young women in the group that just went, what? And it was this amazing charged space. And my job was to protect those opinions and know that those opinions have to be heard, because they'll be up here anyway. It's much better that they come out, because then we can explore them safely, we can navigate them. So, you know, it's really important that we create these spaces for conversations, debate, but not necessarily confrontations. They can be debates positive, confrontation stops us listening a lot of the time. So Tender's work really is about creating safe spaces where young people can share that stuff and know they're not going to be vilified or shot down, that they will be heard, and we will support them to have that conversation. So we're going to just show a very short little film, it's like 4 minutes long, that just shows Tender's work in the classroom, and then we can talk a little bit more about that work before we open up to questions. Is that okay? Is everyone all right? Does everyone just need to stretch or anything, or are you okay? If you need to have I'm just going to put my hands in the air, so if you want to, you can. If you want to have a stretch, that's fine. Do whatever you need to do. I know it's quite intense sitting. So I believe by the power of someone up there, we're going to watch just a short little film about our work. Thank you.
I was 19 years old.
Oh, it's coming, it's coming. I thought I'd keep it lo-fi. This is obviously not lo-fi enough, so sorry about this. If not, I can put my old actor head on and try and act out the whole film, but it won't be as enjoyable. So hopefully this will be able to come on. We'll just give it a couple of moments.
I was 19 years old. Initially, I didn't realise it was abuse. I never imagined someone would treat anyone like that. When I meet new people, I'm constantly thinking, will he do this to me? Will he be abusive to me? Will he control me? I think if someone had taught me about relationships when I was at school, I think I would have known what to look for. I don't think it would have happened.
We look at the early warning signs of relationships that might become abusive or controlling or coercive. So we're equipping young people with the skills to be able to identify those early warning signs of a relationship that might be going bad.
The water, please.
Why?
Right, so you either give me that water or I'll show everyone them pictures that you sent.
In life, we have situations, we have problems, issues come about in relationships that young people have never experienced before.
He didn't hit her, didn't touch her. What makes you think that might be domestic violence?
The exciting thing about the workshops is that our facilitators will go into a room of 30 young people and we have no idea what might happen.
I make you a deal. You give me some of your water and I'll protect you from everyone outside.
We have a plan, but because they're young people, they bring all sorts of different conversations, experiences, ideas. They're talking about an issue that very rarely comes up for them in a classroom setting.
I'm a PSAT teacher, so for me, one of the best ways in exploring issues is through drama.
Please, forgive me.
No.
It's not my fault. I grew up in an environment where I was natural.
What do you mean?
Using theatre and the arts is a really optimistic and creative approach to a really difficult issue.
My dad always hit my mum, and my brother always hit his girlfriend.
Drama gives us an opportunity to look at that situation and look at different ways we could respond to it.
He said about, my dad used to hit my mom. Like, he should be learning from that instead of, being influenced by it.
So that's how we see that that's an excuse, and he's just using that to try to manipulate her.
If you give them a character, it allows them to access something quite tricky from a distance. That distance is really important because then they might end up telling you things or speaking in a way that is quite personal or anecdotal sometimes, but they can hide behind the fact that it's a character.
You can see real changes in those young people's behaviours and their thinking. You could actually watch and see, they get it.
Personally, I would take away from the workshop is how to identify unhealthy and healthy relationships.
You can see the situation instead of just trying to imagine it.
I think just how to help someone that I know, like a friend or family member, that is in an unhealthy relationship and how to try and get them out.
I'm constantly impressed actually with the responses that the primary school children give in this workshop. Through drama, children are given this opportunity to step into the shoes of somebody else, empathise with that character, support that character, give that character advice, and through that they can then apply that to their own lives or perhaps to the lives of their family or their friends.
The word tender in itself for me sums it up. Tender can be as tender as a bruise, but tender can be as tender as a heart. And we're about saying, let's look at how tender and special a heart can be. Again, it comes back to why we enable young people to have that language to say, I don't want this relationship, this is not okay, I deserve more. Sort of just shows the work a little bit more in action. As we mentioned, Tender have been going for 20 years. We started with 5 projects in 5 schools in London, going through the drama department, because often drama teachers tend to be that little bit braver to try something new. Shout out to drama teachers. And we look at where we are now, 20 years later. We have a presence in every London borough, in primary schools, secondary schools, and also out of school settings. It's really important that this work doesn't just sit within mainstream education. We want, ideally, with funding, to be able to go wherever children and young people are and know that some children and young people need this work in slightly different ways. We have special educational need focus projects. Specifically, again, we will work with organisations and schools who have an expertise in that work to be able to reach children and young people however they present, however they identify, whatever challenges they may be coming up against. Because first and foremost, we have a relationship with ourselves, then with others, then with the wider world. So although the issues of domestic abuse and sexual violence I may not have experienced myself, I always describe it as like you throw a pebble into the water. None of us are that far away from those ripples. So therefore, it's a human issue that we all need to understand. So as I say, we started with this handful of projects. We now have worked with over, I'm going to read them because I'm not good with numbers. You know I didn't pass maths. We've worked with over 535,000 children and young people and over 27,000 adults. And that's growing. That's growing. As Jake said at the beginning, we now have a presence up and down the country. And it was really important and is really important to us as an organisation that it's not London-centric, that children and young people exist everywhere and their interactions with the issues, although they might sometimes sound different or may have different regional interactions with what might be going on, ultimately, everyone deserves age-appropriate, interactive, creative relationship education. And we need to be offering it all the time, not just a tick box, or they've had that lesson. We need to continue to offer this so that young people reach and meet this work when they're ready to accept it or when they're ready to take it on board for whatever reason. So we exist, as we've said, because we believe that all children and young people should have this healthy relationship education. You saw in the video, we use an arts-based approach. Jake, you've sort of mentioned a little bit about it already. Could you talk a little bit more to us all about sort of what Tender do and why we do it, especially with regards to that arts-based approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the video summed it up really perfectly, that I think that there's something important about distance when you're having a lot of these conversations. We don't want to go into a space and expose those young people to feeling pressured or having to share things about themselves. And the arts is just a fantastic way of doing that. We allow young people to meet us wherever they're at and share their stories however they want to, if they want to. And if they don't want to, if this is still a completely abstract conversation, perhaps young people have no experience with relationships, perhaps, they have just started to develop feelings for somebody, but they're not sure what, like wherever they're at, an arts-based approach allows them to see the next step of what that might look like in a really safe way. And for some of them, that might well be, realising, oh, actually, maybe the reason why I like that person isn't necessarily the healthiest of reason. Perhaps the fact that this person is buying me gifts all of the time and texting me non-stop and sometimes doesn't say goodnight to me, and and I think he knows the power that not saying goodnight to me has, because it means that I'm up all night. Like that, maybe actually that's not love. Maybe that's not the relationship I deserve. Maybe that's unhealthy. And we're not having that conversation with them directly. We're not asking them to tell us about their relationship. We're exploring it through characters. We're exploring it through activities that enable them to get physical and debate and talk about their opinions. So yeah, I think that distance is the really powerful and important thing.
And it's probably important to say that often when we work within settings, we will be in there for a couple of days. Yeah. So again, that's a real luxury. We're very aware that's a luxury. It's not a 50-minute teaching period where the teacher has just had to come from doing a million of other things that may not be connected to relationship education. We very much come in to deliver that work with those young people. Yeah. And again, I think that's a real privileged position to be in. Yeah. So we can do it in shorter ways, but our sort of gold standard, as it were, is to work with a group for 2 full days. And the joy of that, and I say this from experience as a facilitator, is that frequently there'll be young people that are very different on day one, will not necessarily speak, not necessarily always want to engage, and that's okay. And then you come back on that day 2, and when you look at like, what did we do yesterday, and it's like a different person. I will always ask, put your hand up, you don't have to say anything. If you thought about anything that you learned yesterday, just tap your fingers on your knees. If you spoke to anyone about anything that you learnt yesterday, just tap your toes in your shoes. And just seeing the amount of young people that, even if they're not offering something up vocally, the amount of stuff that's going in. And time again, suddenly these young people come back on day 2 and are like, now I know you, now I've sussed you out, I know that this is a safe space, start offering stuff. And that's such a privilege. That's a real privilege.
Yeah. We're just going to talk about how a project culminates, which I think is one of the most amazing things about a Tender project. So we work with a group of up to 30 young people intensely over 2 days, which, as Daisy's just described, we often see a really significant journey. At the end of those 2 days, we organise with the school a peer sharing. So the young people who have taken part in the project have an opportunity to creatively produce some kind of presentation. Perhaps they rehearse the scenes that we've explored in the project. Perhaps they come up with a new way to present the information. But that peer teaching is a really important component of our project. It goes back to the conversations earlier on. We can stand in front of an assembly and we can talk about relationships as much as we like, but that's a completely different thing to having young people up there themselves, perhaps a year above, who have a little bit more influence, who feel, that much older to a year 8 compared to a year 7, talking to them about what they can expect potentially over the next year in terms of their relationships. That peer sharing it's just the most magical part of the project.
And there's also something really vital about saying to those young people, what do you think your peers, who haven't had the luxury of 2 full days around this, what do you think they need to know, should know, would like to know about? And there's something wonderful about them seeing that ownership of them saying, actually, we do need to talk about actually what the definition of consent feels like, rather than just words on a page, for example, and them taking that ownership. Sarah, obviously we've done a number of projects at your school.
Yeah.
How have you, what have you noticed in terms of children and young people's engagement with that creative arts-based approach?
I think they're always a little bit apprehensive coming in to start off with. They're like, what's this?
Why are the tables moved out of the way?
Why are the
That's
tables?
always a bit scary.
Yeah, we do try and get the dance studio, which is a lovely space. So I don't want to say the word enjoy, but when they kind of come together, there's this camaraderie between them that they've kind of taken part in this workshop, and they've learnt a little bit about each other. They've learnt a lot about themselves. Every workshop is completely different. Every year that we've done this, one year we did have a COVID year, didn't we? And they all had to, they literally dropped their scripts when one student walked in and went, we've got to go to the tennis courts.
Yeah, that was very dramatic.
We've got COVID or something like that. And all these kids just dropped their script and then ran out in a very dramatic way.
And they never came back.
And
we made sure they got signposting and support, but
we were like,
it was very strange.
Dear, yeah, that was a bit crazy. But yeah, they're all very different. They all bring something very different to the table. The DSL at the school, normally we overlook the registers. It was year 9 that we do the project with. Yeah, and then I think at the end, some of them will come to me or come to you at the end and just talk, won't they, about things, and you know that you've kind of got a person that wants to talk about things more or can help.
You said at the beginning, I don't want to say they enjoy it, but I think it's really important
I
to say
think,
that, like, actually,
well, it's a tough subject, isn't it, to talk about?
Yeah. Often a question we will ask is, did you enjoy the project?
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no.
No.
Did you learn anything? Yes.
Yeah.
And that's really important. I think actually it is important, and like a big part of why we use an arts-based approach, arts-based approach, slow down, is because it is enjoyable. It can be scary for some people, and as we said, not everyone has to be involved if they don't want to be, but it's really important to enjoy the education around it, because ultimately we should have enjoyable relationships. So it shouldn't just be fear. You know, relationship education shouldn't be just about fear. It should be about being able to engage and enjoy the conversations, feel able to enjoy and engage in those conversations. So I think enjoyment is really...
we'll go with
let's go with it. It's positive.
And some people some people will engage with the script work, so they all like to present in a different way. I remember when I picked up the project from my predecessor, it was a year 9 assembly, so there were these 30 students in front of their whole year group. It's daunting enough for me, and I've done it long enough, but kind of holding things or acting, and I was like, you're so brave. But then the next year they said, we'd like to film this, so they made it into a film. And then the next year there were bits where they were filmed, and then they did lots of display work. So every project has been totally different, and every child within the project has found a different part of the performance that they want to do. So some of them will be the arty ones, say, we'd like to produce a poster so that we can share this information. Some people will say, we'll take on a script, we would like to, and that's really lovely, that it's very individual.
I've often done it when there's a young person like, I definitely don't want to get up and share, and they become stage manager, and they take that so seriously, and they're like my right-hand woman, moving everything, and it's like, that's so important for the whole piece of work that we all come together. Before we open up to any questions, I just would like to ask one more question and then one more thing to everybody. Jake, in terms of this work and the issues around power and control and choice and responsibility, I think it's really important that we don't just focus on it all being joyful, which it is, and I think that's really important, but also there are elements where we do have to challenge behaviours or attitudes, and that's a really important part of Tender's work, that we engage with those challenges respectfully and kindly. Anything you want to say around children and young people's engagement or the piece of work itself in terms of power and control and choice and responsibility about young people taking ownership or recognising?
I think, as I mentioned earlier on, having the right person holding the space is really important, because sometimes you will be confronted with 30 young people who all hold a very harmful view, and no matter what, no matter how much juggling you do in the space, there's no convincing being done there. So I think what's really important is that the person who's holding that space is aware of what the standpoint of the organisation is, and that is that absolutely nobody, and for an example of that perhaps will be young people angry about the fact that boys and young men, for example, aren't often included in conversations about abuse because of the statistical disproportionality of victims, which is a fair thing to be angry and frustrated about for those young people in that space. And it's not about shutting that down or discrediting those conversations or those feelings at all. But what's really important is that the person who's holding that space can hold those feelings whilst also still, for example, emphasising the fact that it is a gendered issue inherently, and that actually perhaps instead of getting angry, you can get into the solution. You can be a part of the solution, perhaps by talking to your friends about it. You can change a harmful opinion that they might have that perpetuates that system that allows for that to be the case. So I think, the facilitator needs to understand the fundamentals of the issue, and that is that absolutely nobody deserves to be abused. Nobody deserves to experience unhealthy relationships. That it's always the responsibility is on the perpetrator that abuse, choices being made to use abuse. And yeah, the facilitator needs to be confident in going back to those fundamentals, regardless of what is in the space, because that's what the message needs to be.
Yeah. I'm aware of time.
Sorry.
No, don't apologise. Before we open it up to any questions, if people do want to ask anything, if you have a highlight of teaching RSE or engaging in RSE, what's one highlight? Let's give it some positives, because I know there are positives out there. A positive of either teaching it or experiencing it. Shall I start?
Go on then.
I'm working with a school at the moment, and they've got a play bus in their school playground, and it keeps getting broken into by other slightly older children in the community. And I was doing a sort of audit of their school and their all their policies and things like that. And one of the questions was, how safe do your children feel being at school? And I specifically asked, in relation to this play bus, something that's happening on their school grounds, how safe do they feel? Because the 9-year-old me would have been really scared. So I think I presumed, unrightly, that their children would be scared. And actually they said, our children feel angry. And I was like, yes, that's brilliant. They're not scared. They're not me. They're not the 9-year-old me. They feel angry. And that is something, if we can harness that, if we can make that a call for action, if we can encourage them to say, yeah, this isn't fair, that injustice is not okay. So for me, that's been a real highlight and a really important reminder to never presume that my experience is the same as someone else, but to give them that space to answer it for themselves. So that's a highlight for me that's popped in recently. What for you, Leah, maybe in terms of receiving relationship education, or as we've spoken about those individuals so often being important, is there a highlight for you?
I think more looking forward, I think young people, everyone, but especially young people, are naturally curious. I think we want to learn about this stuff. And I think going back, I wish I was taught more about relationships, not just maybe romantic ones, but what a family relationship should look like in a healthy way, or friendships, or I think the one highlight though of going through the lack of education, I guess is the way to say it, is everyone was kind of in the same boat and we were all equally confused.
Yeah.
And trying to learn ourselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that was through maybe social media, for example. But we're all in it together.
And curiosity, isn't it? I always think like curiosity is a seasoning we should sprinkle liberally through every conversation about relationships. The hows, the whats, the whys. Yes, absolutely. Sarah, a highlight for you of teaching RSE?
I think it's when you get those students who come up and want to know more and trust you with information sometimes, and they would just say, how do I get help with this? And that I can signpost them. Yeah. And that, they want to know. And for me, building, especially working with you on the Reset project, which is the other thing, just building a curriculum that they wanted and listening to their opinions on what they wanted to know. So hopefully I can, in my school at least, put in a good curriculum that is relevant to them and that they want to, they want.
Thank you. Jake?
Back when I was delivering the work, I think something that has stuck in my memory throughout the years is a young boy, I think he was year 7, getting quite frustrated because he had a script and he was playing the part of a perpetrator, and he was like, I want the opportunity to do this again, not like it is here. This gives me an opportunity to rehearse what I want my relationships to be like. So he rewrote the script and then performed that in a way that he wanted that conversation to go, which was just so gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, for us, Tender exists to help young people rewrite the script. That they don't have to, as I said, relive what someone else has put in place for them. They do have power and control and choice and responsibility in their own lives. That can be really hard. But ultimately, we're giving them the space to hear their own voices and know that has power. Thank you, panel. I'm going to open up. I think we've got time if anyone does have any questions for anyone. You don't have to. Yeah, we've got a question. You were the first. You get 10 points for putting your hand up first. I haven't got any points, but if I did, you'd have them. Yeah. Oh, there's a microphone coming, I think. Thank you.
Is it an on microphone?
Yeah.
Or not? And my question's mostly for Leanne, and I 100% agree with everything that has been said about professionalisation of the subject and closing that safeguarding loop and all of the kind of the key tenets that we're hoping for now. But I'm a little bit anxious about the next bit. I don't know if everyone knows, but the guidance that you speak of is currently under review. And whilst it's being reviewed, everyone, I think, is a little bit on edge as to what's about to appear, and I think it's going to appear quite soon. And I think there's going to be a 12-week consultancy. And whilst that guidance is out for kind of debate, Leanne, how do we mobilise more young people like you to engage with that consultation process? Because from what I can hear loud and clear is there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of media, and there's not enough young people's voices being present in that. And what can we do to make those 12 weeks a really good 12 weeks?
I think ask them a lot of. So when I learned about Tender, I didn't realize that there were already groups educating younger people about domestic violence and things like that. I thought that was something that should have been a solution years ago. And I think just as a young person, I just would want to be told about the opportunities and have maybe an open discussion in the school. So if I were in year 10 again, I'd love to have maybe the student council arrange like a forum where everyone could come in and say, what are your opinions on this? This is what is being reviewed. This is what it means. What do you think? What questions do you have? So I think this is
So school-based.
probably school-based.
What's going to make people click the Department of Education link and do a really dull survey to speak up and say what needs to be said? Because that's what it is. It's going to be a really dull survey on the DFE website. But it's really, really important that everyone's heard in that process. And so you think schools have got the power to bring in their young people?
I think that's the biggest collection of young people I could think of getting, and if we had that open discussion and people got passionate as they did when Tender comes in and does the workshops. For example, I feel quite passionate today, especially talking about it. I'd be way more likely to immediately do the survey on a computer if we had the meeting and then immediately went to a computer lab or got our laptops out and said, okay, you're upset about this, you don't think this is right, let's tell them in the survey right now. Like immediate action after. Because the longer it's left in between the conversation, I think the less interest that there will be.
And just to say, Tender is really pushing for young people's voice, and we're not the only organisation trying to push for young people's voices to be heard within that consultation. It's a bit of knocking, hammering on that door, but I think it's important to know that we are definitely trying to push on that, and I know other organisations are, but absolutely, yeah, it's
not easy.
Are both ears hearing? Is yeah, absolutely. We had another question down here.
There's obviously lots of stats around what are referred to as ghost children. What is being done and what can be done to make sure that this message reaches them when they're not necessarily in school?
Yeah, I mean, we know it's increasing in terms of children not accessing education for myriad of reasons. What can be done? We just have to keep trying. We have to keep building relationships with all other organisations. I think that's why it's important, as I said at the beginning, it's not just schools. We try to go to anywhere children and young people are. So it's about relationship building and finding out where are those spaces that children and young people may be engaging with, not necessarily through a sort of educational or academic standpoint. It's about just keeping building those relationships, I think. It's also about advocating and supporting children and young people that we are engaging with to be good, positive allies and educators to their peers, because they may still be connecting to their peers who may not be coming into school. So it's about how do we keep empowering young people to want to be advocates for change around unhealthy relationships. They're not just doing it because adults tell them it's not okay. They're doing it because they feel passionate and they know what's okay and what's not okay. But it's a continual battle, I think, to reach those children and young people, but one that we are striving to be part of. I wish I had an answer. I don't know if anyone, I don't know if there is a golden nugget answer. It would be great if there was. Maybe that will come out of the whole day. But I think it's just to keep engaging with children and young people and getting them to engage with each other as well.
I think a growing area of work, particularly for Tender, is our adult services. And I think that although we've spoken quite a lot today within a school's context, we do work outside of schools as well. So actually, although it's really important to have a really robust curriculum in school, we also need to look at this as a public health issue and as a general issue that affects all of us. If an adult for example, isn't aware of what constitutes a healthy or unhealthy relationship, how on earth are they going to hold a space with their child and educate their child on what is a healthy or unhealthy relationship? So what's really important is that we are working not just with the children themselves, but the adults that form the communities around them, so that the adults, whoever they may be, feel confident enough to hold those spaces and have those conversations themselves.
Have we got time for one more question? Yeah, up in the mid. Oh, sorry. I just got pulled into the centre.
It's okay, don't worry. I'm fine with that. I'm a drama therapist and a creative arts therapist, so I know like the power of working creatively and working indirectly, and the power of metaphor and all of that. And I just want to say thank you. It's amazing what you're doing and bringing in creativity into schools as well, and like allowing that in schools, because it just opens up a world of other ways that children can learn. I've worked in special needs schools, mainstream schools, in the NHS with adults and children, but also in young offenders institutes for young people who are convicted of offences. And I have a couple of questions. I'm going to be cheeky, but I'm going to put them into one so then you can shoot them back. So I guess the first one I was thinking of, how do you support your facilitators or your teachers as well, I guess, in the schools, who are delivering the lessons, delivering the workshops? Because as we know, we don't always know what burdens and weight we're carrying as we come into these sessions, and what support is available for teachers, for facilitators who are maybe triggered by some of the information that they're giving, or the disclosures that are coming up as well in them. Is there like reflective spaces for reflective practice? Is there funding to get counsellors, therapists, well-being spaces to talk about that? And I guess the other question is, how do you work with cultural and cultural differences and different ethnicities and the differences there?
Do you want to take that one, Jake?
I can do. Yeah.
Just in terms of, I suppose, in terms of our broader wraparound for our facilitators delivering the work.
So it's really, really, really important, of course, that all of our delivery staff feel supported and held by the organisation. We have noticed it a lot more with longer term interventions, actually. So with our 2-day model, which is our main offer and has historically been our main offer, we've always offered counselling, we've always offered support available to them 24/7. But actually what we're finding is the more intently we work with schools, actually the more important that's become. Because if, for example, we're working with a school for a year, the staff in that school, the young people in that school, build a relationship with our staff, which might mean opening up more, might mean sharing more about their personal experiences, and actually that it's not quite enough to give them just an EAP number or an offer to support them as and when they need. So we're actually looking to implement clinical supervision for our staff looking forward, but of course that comes at cost. So we're at the moment trying to find ways to make sure that is available for everybody that works with us.
And in terms of your other question, your two-parter, we try and work with other organisations. We don't have all the answers. We are not experts in everything. So we try and work with other organisations that may have more lived experience or known experience around specific practices or cultural practices or different ways of potentially looking at, say, what family is or what a home is. So we absolutely do our best to partner with organisations. We also have our youth board at the centre of what we do, which is about children and young people. So they are the experts. So we bring everything back to our youth board in terms of any new pieces of work that we might be rolling out or considering rolling out. We really hold young people at the centre of that. But we are, as all good organisations, always asking and talking and coming back to being curious. So I hope that sort of answers your questions. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you to the panel, but also thank you very much to all of you. We've talked about lots of stuff and it might have brought up stuff from our own time in school. So please do be gentle and kind to yourselves. I'm just going to alert you to this poster that was made by some children and young people at a secondary school. I think it's really important to ask ourselves, what is it that we want or deserve in relationships? We all deserve happy, healthy relationships. they're challenging sometimes to get, but we deserve them. So you might choose to answer that for yourself. What's your non-negotiable? What's the thing that you take with you? For me, it's I deserve time on my own. So I might go and have a bit of time on my own after this. But thank you so much. We are here if anyone has any questions or you want to ask about anything, or you've got connections to schools that need projects, come and talk to us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.